What is up, Theology Nerds? This is Tripp, and it is time. It's time for the Theology Nerd podcast right here in your earpiece. This is part of the Homebrewed Christianity Podcast Network, or that's the website you go to find out about it.
Homebrewed Christianity Podcast Network.
That sounds
very professional.
Well, we have more than one podcast.
Yeah, it's true.
You got Homebrewed Christianity, the OG. You got Theology Nerd Podcast. You got the Homebrewed Culture Cast. You got the Lectio Cast. You got Story of God Cast.
Oh my gosh.
You got the Barrel Age Podcast.
So many casts.
This is like a casting. Cast. And this, anyway, we're redoing, relaunching, reworking the Theology Nerd Podcast into a host of different ones. This is a Q&A show.
Yeah.
Say hi, Nathan.
Hello.
Have you even told anyone who you are?
No, this is Nathan.
Nathan is a student at the Hatchery.
This is true.
He is planting a common cause community, which is a community. Community is the word you use if you are a hip innovator in the South Bay.
I'm so hip.
It also sounds very South Park.
Yep. Community.
Anyway, Common Cause Community is like a faith community built around service. It's something Jesus would be into rather than listening to someone talk. Yeah, but you're discovering it.
I'm learning as I go.
You're figuring it out. Community built around caring for people with disabilities, physical and mental. And yeah, if you're against that, screw you.
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
Gosh, what a horrible person.
So I was just people are driving and they were like, well, that makes me awkward. Anyway, we're going to answer Q&As today. But before we do that, Nathan, because you're going to be participating mostly so I can drink while you're saying stuff.
Yep.
We have questions from the SpeakPipe. These are people who listen to the podcast. They send in questions. We've kind of grouped them around things.
Yeah, we've got a couple groups here.
The biggest group was, we aren't answering those questions, and or why did you call about that?
Or you don't need to get so close to the microphone.
Yeah. So in the future, if you leave questions on the SpeakPipe, which is at homebrewedchristianity.com, there's a giant microphone on the side. You click it. Your computer may ask you to say, yes, you have permission to use my microphone. That's so that it can record what you're saying. Do that. You could send questions via Facebook, Twitter, which is better. Mm-hmm. I prefer Twitter, at Tripp Fuller. You could send them via email to mediaguru@homebrewedchristianity.com.
But really, Twitter is better.
So. Twitter is better. There are a whole host of emails that I have. We'll have to do a catch-up episode of email questions. We'll have to do an email Q&A. This is the greatest hits of the last 5 or 6 months on SpeakPipe, and not counting election-related ones, because those are all being
special
saved.
One,
because a lot of responses came for election. There's also probably 5,000 or 6,000 people just thanking me for my book. We only picked one.
Quite a bit, actually.
5,000 or 6,000 people loved my book. Yeah. Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Jesus. You have permission to buy more than one copy.
Maybe even 250?
Don't ruin later, Nathan. We have to set up for our calls.
I was just an arbitrary number.
Okay, yeah. My bad. Yes, you can buy 250 of them. Anyway, at Homebrewed Christianity, we provide people ingredients to brew their own faith. So we have to give a disclaimer right now that Nathan, who is halfway through his master's degree in theology, and Tripp, who's 3/4 the way through his dissertation, and is probably done with the rough draft when you listen to this, if Tripp's wife is still his friend, that she's kind of threatened me.
Yeah.
We'll say whatever we're thinking, but you don't need to agree with us. We just want you not to have crappy theology. That's
right.
Homebrewed Christianity. You brew your own faith. So don't take strong opinions stated sarcastically as personal. Because you want to know what, Nathan? You're not your ideas.
No, not at all.
Even when you had much worse ones. Before you were formed deeply by reading Heidegger with me.
That has formed me.
So, but before we jump in, I want to ask you a question. So when you came to the hatchery, in the last year and a half, you've been doing classes. Like, what's a question you're interested in that you wouldn't have been interested in prior to like being forced to read books? By that I mean, you will regret your student loans if you didn't actually do the work.
Yeah.
Like what? Like, was there a moment, a text, a question, or something where you're like, this is a new level of theology nerdom. It's like your theology nerd bone of a tree grew a new ring. Okay.
Yeah, I see where you're going.
I was thinking redwoods.
Yeah. I'm with you.
And you went to see the big trees. You and Miriam went to see big trees in the rings, and that was the reference point. I reevaluated halfway through, but
all right. Well, I would say two things. One would probably be the reading
directly in the microphone.
Reading Moltmann.
Jürgen Moltmann.
Which and simultaneously taking a historical theology class, from
Paul Capitz,
up through Luther, and I think that both of those kind of simultaneously, going through both courses at the same time, made me feel I don't know how to answer your question other than to say that I feel like it's okay to believe things again. If that makes sense. I mean, my background is not theology, but I think that in the world that we live in today, it is very easy to not believe things or to constantly cycle through things and throw away the stuff that we used to believe and try to find new things. So part of my goal of coming here was to, I guess, brew my own faith in a way, but to get, try to get down to some basic ingredients, the core essentials that without it, you wouldn't really have anything.
Well, what was the oldie but goodie that tickled your fancy? That grew your ring? Tree ring. Theological tree ring.
Theological tree ring. I'm Nathan Loves Trees. After
I know that's your Twitter handle.
It is.
At Nathan Loves Trees. I'm just trying to represent for your brand, trying to do some brand building right there for you, Nathan. And you're giggling like it was something other than foraging. And plus, before you went, you spent time in the woods.
I did a year at least.
At least you don't know how long you were there. Like,
I mean, it was we didn't have.
You were in the Forest Service or something.
I was or something. Yeah,
you worked with Yogi Bear.
Well.
You're protecting
Smokey Bear.
Smokey Bear.
Smokey the Bear.
In West Virginia.
In West Virginia. I lived in the woods. A river ran through my house. Pretty close. But yeah, I lived in the mountains.
What's a Chris Farley's get this, like the way you said, van down
by the river. That was me.
No, you weren't. You were working.
I was working.
AmeriCorps.
I was a volunteer. That's right.
Anyway.
Yeah.
So back to what you were saying.
What I was saying, which is actually funny you bring that up because that was the period in my life where I decided, you know what, maybe I should really give this Christianity thing some real thought. Like, what is it?
You were in the dense wood.
Yeah, the wood was so thick, and
God was like,
"Yep,
have you thought about Jesus?"
Man, put me on the spot. I don't know how to answer your question, but
what was the oldie but goodie? Like the old
oldie but goodie.
Wasn't that what I asked? Like, like you did a history of Christian thought class. Mm-hmm. I know why Moltmann could tickle somebody's theological fancy.
Yeah, and I really liked Augustine.
Tell us about that.
Reading his confessions,
and it is a confession for someone who was like, I'm a Buddhist who sings in an Episcopal choir. To say they liked Augustine,
that's quite a confession.
I know. Like, I don't even think Episcopalians these days are allowed to read Augustine, and you enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it.
You could have
thoroughly.
Maybe it's just dirty.
Maybe it was what it was.
Well, I don't know. What about it?
I feel like maybe it was because it was the first real autobiography, and I felt like he was telling my story as he was telling his. I mean, that's the mark of a good autobiography.
Well, I don't know. Knowing you, the number of parallels just popped into my head. or high.
There's quite a few.
They're not really fit for podcasting.
No.
But have you ever stolen anything that you wrote that much about?
I don't know. I don't think so. Not that I can recall.
Well,
but the relationship he had with his
your
mother...
concubine, no.
Went two different places.
No, I was dodging that.
Yeah.
No, you can either stay as a normal human, because Matt, what didn't Matt tell you?
Yeah, I sound like
Matt Baker,
Romano.
Homebrewed Christianity member.
Late at night.
He said last time you were on the podcast that you sound like Ray Romano trying to whisper.
Yeah. So
anyway, now you know something about Nathan, and in next month we're going to do a series of things over the next couple months. But next month you'll get an episode where we'll tell you about his Common Cause community, and we are going to be recruiting people who go to churches, work with churches, or leaders at churches who want to do an experiment, a little activity, a venture, an artistic venture.
Yes.
To work with families with people with disabilities in them and their congregations. They'll go on like art walk, take pictures, then have like a photo gallery and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan has done them, led them, facilitated them, and he'll be providing you all the goods, all the information. But here's the thing. I'm just telling you this now. Tripp will be attempting to peer pressure you if you care about this. Now, you may say to Jesus, your mom, grandmother, the Holy Spirit, I don't care about people with disabilities, and I don't care if our faith community wants to learn from them, gain from them, and be blessed by people that we tend to ignore. Screw that. Maybe that's you. That's fine. We don't want you to participate. But if you're not, if you don't want to say that, then we're going to be trying to get people together so that we can have these art walks, photo things, show the photo galleries, and then connect all the different groups across the country to really, one, raise awareness, to raise voices around people with disabilities in congregations, to create new relationships, and also be able to connect people that are sharing different circumstances, experiences, and such. Nathan's really passionately committed about it, and so I'm like, you help with lots of podcast stuff and no one even knows who you are. So why not put you on a microphone and then eventually peer pressure them to all do something
Sounds
that if they follow your directions.
Mm-hmm. Oh, they'll be very clear, explicit directions.
I know. I mean, the reason Nathan helps is because he is logical, clear, and rational. And like when he makes a checklist, like if you just follow it, things work out. Hey, Tripp, have you ever thought about writing down all the things you're supposed to do for each episode? Nope. It's like people said, I got an email said, Tripp, we actually had more episodes this year than the number of weeks. And I was like, well, that's because I stepped up in organizing. That's mostly because you got paid. All right. So I'm just saying it's a good thing for us to think about. We'll have some interviews around theology and disability.
Yep.
It's a good thing for you to act on in your faith community, or you can connect us with people that lead your own faith community that care about it. And then who doesn't like art?
I don't know anyone.
Losers. Yeah. That's the correct answer. We're really guilt tripping people. Anyway, speaking of guilt.
Man, you are so good at
this is my transition. Tabitha is a Canadian, and she's really concerned about penal substitutionary atonement. So we're going to listen to Tabitha's question, then we're going to talk and stuff.
Hi, this is Tabitha from Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan in Canada. I've been listening to your podcast for about a year now, and I'm trying to sort a few things out for myself. One of them being I can't logically or ethically come to terms with the penal substitutionary atonement theory that I grew up with as a child and then dropped for a long time when I decided I was done with everything. And now I've come back to wanting to think about all of these things more. And I just can't find any great alternatives that fit with what I feel to be true about God's love for humanity and about what you say, Tripp, about Jesus and God, or that God is at least as nice as Jesus is. And yeah, are there alternatives that I've missed? I mean, I know there's Christ the Victor, I think it's called, and a few other different ways to look at it, but I'm just trying to kind of figure out about, why Jesus had to die, or if he had to die, or maybe that's a really basic thing that you've talked about a million times over on your podcast. I would just love to know if you have just a quick rundown of other atonement theories, or if atonement theory is a worthwhile type thing to think about anyways. Thanks.
That's a transition back in. Do you like that?
That's great.
Oh, wait.
You must have paid a lot of people for all those special events.
Well. The big dollars. Thank you to the Homebrewed Christianity community members. Homebrewedchristianitycommunity.com. Do they donate? That's how they get those special effects. And that's how we transition back in. The thing is, like, when you get a special effects officer like ours, it sounds like I was making a noise, except it's extremely consistent. Yeah. That's how you know it's digitized.
Yep. Yeah, we've got the top people on it.
So Tabitha has a question, and you may be saying to yourself, why is Tabitha the first Q&A audio clip in 6 months on Homebrewed Christianity? It's because, one, Tabitha's Canadian.
And we love Canadians.
And she also quotes me back to myself.
She did. I was impressed.
When you say, like, about that whole, like, God should at least be as nice as Jesus thing. And I say, yeah, I do know about that. It's just like, it's not quite short enough for a hashtag, but it should be.
I got to work on that.
But she also asked about a topic that lots of people ask about. It's atonement theories. And this is what evangelicals are hung up on the most. If you're grew up in the church where your piety, the Christian life, was basically this moment where when you get to the age of accountability, which is what evangelicals use for the time which if you die, you would go to hell because you haven't asked Jesus in your heart. Before that, you're kind of anticipatorily covered. Like, if you can't talk yet, Jesus doesn't want to throw you into hell. God the Father, who's obviously pissed enough to beat Jesus up, doesn't want you to go to hell. He's just and I'm using he on purpose. He's just I hate sinners. and I'm just so holy and junk, I got to show it. And what better way than beating my kid up? And now I felt bad, so I raised him from the dead. And if you're his friend, you're close enough to him that you got splattered when I took him out and are washing the blood, you can come into. That was a joke. I just want you to know, for those that that affirm penal substitutionary atonement. It was an overstated joke. I've been told this occasionally I hyperbolize things where it doesn't sound as if I understand. But that was more for humor's sake. Kind of like Jeff Foxworthy's entire stand-up routine. You can't make Walmart after midnight shopper jokes like Jeff Foxworthy does and have millions of dollars.
You might be a redneck.
You might be a millionaire if. Anyway.
You tell jokes about rednecks.
I was told I should really watch his most recent stand-up thing, and I made it about halfway through.
Really? Halfway?
Yeah.
That's a lot.
I was walking the dog. It was only 30 minutes. And I listened to double speed. But, well, I'm not even going to go. I was about to tell you, there were two jokes where I was like, are you allowed to say that in public and not regret it? Anyway, but what Tabitha is pointing out is she talks about the logical problem of penal substitutionary and the ethical part. Now, here are the two things I would just say about that. The ethical part, I think is important to frame, and I talk about this in my book, that the way you describe what happens on the cross should not create a dichotomy between God the Father and the Son, where the character of the Son is something different than the Father. That the Father has wrath burning against the Son or something like that. Where you get those weird child abuse things. which I agree conservative Christians tend to be overstated, and only in the worst cases would anyone ever say that. And in fact, if you read my book, I give a very large defense of satisfaction theory, which is the better version of penal substitutionary atonement before it's ruined by Calvinists and such. But the original Anselm, I give a very articulate account, the best stated articulation of Anselm, so good that when I gave a talk about it at a Catholic school, even Catholics said, I did not know that's what we thought. If that was the case, I would go to Mass, and I was like, I'm not trying to get you to go to Mass. But the theology teacher there was like, that is the church's teaching. So I'm just telling you, I like Anselm, don't necessarily agree with him, but it's a beautiful thing. Satisfaction theory. That's different than penal substitutionary atonement theory, which is like satisfaction theory plus weird Protestant individualistic framework and guilt complex. But the ethical problem is that when the cross is something where God's character is something different than you see in the person of Jesus. And I think a lot of people try to narrow it down to the event of the cross. You know, where they're like, oh, well, Jesus was just being faithful to God, but God was being like a Puritan. And I think this is the move. That's the wrong question. The question about the ethic of God at the cross is not, is Jesus being faithful and God's not, or is God judging him, or whatever way you want to do it. Is Jesus being loving and all this kind of stuff, but is God venting wrath on the wrong person or whatever? That entire framework has the ethical problem of God not being as nice as Jesus. It also has the logical problem of God being divided against God's self, right? But the ethical and logical problem I think that's important to think about is if the question is about forgiveness of sin for the guilty alone, when you deal with the cross, you've actually left out the very people Jesus taught were the ethical center of the entire kingdom of God, or kingdom of God, which I prefer, or the realm of God, or the commonwealth of God, or the reign of God. There's a lot of variations, but in Greek, you can go basileia theo a lot of different ways. But here's what I mean. Who did Jesus hang out with? Sinners. Who were sinners? Shepherds. Shepherds are sinners. Lepers are sinners. Prostitutes are sinners. Here's the thing. None of them woke up one day and was like, I'm a nice individual and I'm going to go sin. They were in those situations because of socioeconomic and cultural situations that were then oppressed doubly by the religious people who said, you are a prostitute as a woman who's no longer married. Maybe the husband died, kicked him out because you got old and burnt his toast, which was legally allowed. Burnt toast is the actual example. Anyway, from the first century text, it wasn't toast. It was burning food. But nonetheless, if you were a bad cook, that was good grounds for you to legally divorce your wife as a Jewish person in the first century. Point being that shepherds, lepers, prostitutes, all these people are ones who are left out of the system and not giving a place, and then are labeled sinners by the regime of religion and truth, which justifies via religion their ostracizing.
There you go.
Ostracization, if that was a word.
I didn't think it should be.
It sounds cooler than ostracizing.
Yep.
Anyway, when you say it, don't think ostrich or that scene in the Swiss Family Robinson where the middle kid, Ernst is the one who has to ride the ostrich, I think. I don't know. I love Swiss Family Robinson. It's my favorite Disney movie. Anyway, why I said that is that the cross should not just be a question about God dealing with sinners, but also the sinned against. And not just the guilty, but the guilt-ridden. And when you reframe it that way, then penal substitutionary atonement is only an answer for certain people. And it's not the people that occupied Jesus' ministry. The people that were his disciples, the people that were the women that he gathered and followed him, the people that he ministered to, are not people whose primary identity is you're a sinner that did something evil before God. They were labeled sinner on the terms that you have in the first century historically because the cultural, religious, socioeconomic system oppressed them that way. But it wasn't like they woke up and were like, oh, I'm going to go to porn websites, or I'm going to cheat on a test, or whatever. They weren't sinners like that. The label sinner was a socio-cultural economic term that was used by religious people to label people who were victims of the system itself. So when the cross is interpreted post-Constantine, we come up with atonement theories that deal with an individual's sin that no longer questions a system that ever labels people sinner for a predicament they're born into because of the systemic oppression that they are under. And so the logical and ethical problem of the cross isn't, for me, just penal substitutionary atonement or whatever. It's that Jesus' whole ministry was overturning the systemic assumptions that kept people labeled sinner just for economic, social, cultural reasons, and then the religion supported it. Well, once you break out of those ethical and logical predicaments, when you say God should at least be as nice as Jesus, that begins with the cross and resurrection should be good news, not just for sinners, but the sinned against. And that completely changes stuff. And anyway, what are you thinking? I started to, like, the first question being about Jesus really is like a temptation for me to start preaching and trying to avoid doing it.
Yeah.
You should really intervene more, Nathan.
Well, I don't want to get on a roll there.
Well, don't do it.
You don't have as many opportunities to preach anymore, so I just wanted to give you a chance.
It is true, but if you want to invite me to preach, I will, because this past year I really dropped from like 32 sermons to like 19.
What?
I know.
Shocking.
And now I'm really worried.
Yeah.
It is bad. I got so many. I listen to the LectioCast.
Maybe you should just start
I read the lectionary.
A new stream
called If I worked at a church, I would talk about this.
They're just you sermonizing for, I don't know, 45 minutes, an hour and a half.
Well, then I don't have to do prep. I just read the lectionary text and have read some commentaries. Then I just start talking.
I like
and
it.
An hour later, there are 5 or 6 sermons in there. Well, that made me... Anyway, nonetheless, go ahead.
No, I'm just... So what do we do now? How do you... Because that seems great to bring all that up, but it doesn't really change the sort of cultural guilt that we've inherited from those theories, if that makes sense. Like, I think that we tend to, probably from our religious heritage in this country, view things in those terms. So, like, what do you do? And it's like that way of looking at things is just a part of the way I look at the world, and I can't help it.
Well, you think that. Try being a Baptist preacher's kid. Well, here's one of the things that, and now I know that my own experience is not like a lot of people's. So, like, Tabitha talked about quitting Christianity, coming back, and then going like, but what about this?
Yeah.
You're like, all the junk Jesus talked about? Down for it. You know about the relationships with God, people, community, caring, acting, all that junk? Totally cool. You know about being in a church during Christmas and hearing the Messiah hymn sang correctly by a large number of people with a high quality organ and all that junk? Excellent. That kind of stuff. Down. It would be nice for us to have a way to talk about the cross and resurrection that's not that depressing. So, and here's what I'd say is that once you take out the very individualistic framework that we've imposed post-Constantine, that the definition of sinner and salvation needs to be something a problem an individual has, and it's between them and God, and that its resolution means you go to heaven. If you eliminate those 3 things, the Bible and the early church have a whole lot more to say. Surprisingly, the Bible talks about salvation in at least 6 different ways. I only know this just because I wrote a chapter on it in my dissertation recently. Salvation in Scripture is related both to the reconciliation of people in their family units, meaning multiple generations of family. Salvation's related to people and individuals who they've harmed significantly for which they can't recover. Salvation is used in relationship to communities of people socially, economically, or culturally ostracized. Salvation is used to people who are oppressed, who the oppressors are permanently reorganized because of their liberation. Salvation is used in reference to people who are economically a people, not within an individual culture, a people who are like enslaved, not like like within one political system, which is what I was referring to, but a enslaved group. An enslaved could mean like direct slavery or Jim Crow, or we've come up with all sorts of ways to pretend we aren't enslaving people. Anyway, it could come with liberation in that. Salvation's also used to restoration, not of individuals' relationships alone, but of peoples and of families and of whole communities of people returning from exile to home. Salvation, and the last one, is that salvation is used in reference to God in the world. Now, I say the last one importantly because the only time salvation in the Bible is used in which one of the two major actors who are reconciling is God in the world. And that's because God so loved the world. The reconciliation of God is never a partisan activity in which God is taking sides among the elect who God's love and those they don't. God takes sides for the liberation of those who are being oppressed presently in our material situation, for God taking sides with the world for the whole world's reconciliation into the life of God. And one of the things that Anselm, and this is the callback because Tabitha brought it's like, oh, well, satisfaction theory and penal, blah, 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 blah. Anselm, the guy that came up with what came to be later penal substitutionary atonement, better called satisfaction, he recognized that God has chosen to not be God without us. The satisfaction understanding of the atonement is primarily determined that God will stand up for who God said God is, the God of love. And then what's required of God in a broken world is the God-man, the incarnation, that God gives God's self, the infinite one, to the finite world. And that act becomes the means by which the cosmos, the world, becomes deified, comes to participate in the divine life. And not because God picks a few people God likes, but because the God of love can only use that title if God is loving. And that means the reconciliation or the salvation that I listed and all those other things are necessary and anticipatory promises of a moment where God saves all that God created. Not because God picks sides and like in a fight or you're elect and you're reprobate or whatever, but because God has chosen to be the God of salvation. When God says, I am who I will become to Moses, and God, who does God promise to become in Christ, is the word of all creation, which came to the ones that did not know him, this is the prologue of John, for the very purpose of having all creation come to participate in God. Sin, law, death, all those things are conquered in the cross and resurrection, but not so that a few people get parsed out, but so that salvation, which is anticipated when God takes sides in liberation, in exile, and all these things, is brought in the life of God. To me, when I meet people that come back into Christianity, that quit Christianity like Tabitha's talking about, and they get back in there, so what do we do about the cross and resurrection? It's like they were handed a really bad Cards Against Humanity card, and the card says like, God the Father kicked the shit out of Jesus the Son because insert a blank. And then now you're sitting there with your stack of cards on your theological Cards Against Humanity, and what you don't say is like, have you thought that theology might not be God playing Cards Against Humanity? It might be cards for humanity. Like God might actually be for us. Now, you may be saying to yourself, Tripp, you're a Protestant. Isn't like the foundation of Protestantism that God is for us and that God is with us? Tripp, you just got done with Christmas. It's Emmanuel, God with us. Yes, I do realize that. But for a lot of Christians, they will say all those words. It will never fall into their system. So they'll sit there and go like, I want God to be nice as Jesus, but there's a logical and ethical problem with the version of the atonement I have, and I don't know what to do with it. Is there any other options? Blah, 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 blah. Well, yeah, there is. And one of them is just like more conservative biblical Christianity, because there are all these stacks of other understandings of salvation that don't involve you getting forgiven to go to heaven.
Right.
It involves material reorganizing of societies, cultures, and individuals and families so that well-being in relationships happens. And those anticipate the salvation that Scripture talks about in relationship to God, which is God reconciling God's self to the world. Not the world figuring out junk to relate to God. God's figuring it out for God's self. Why? Well, the answer to that's the God-man, the incarnation. And I know you know this because you wrote a paper on Athanasius.
This is true. I did.
No, but that's this, and I had a conversation with you and Kevin and Jessica individually, all three of which basically said, well, I didn't know that old Orthodox Christianity was so cool. Like, that the incarnation wasn't about God beating people up or something.
Right. It could be just because I'm personally interested in this, and so I always think about these sorts of things. But
is there something people interested in that they aren't personally interested in?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe.
I don't know. Because, like, if you have an interest in it for more than 30 seconds, then you're into it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, the amount of things I care about now that I was like, well, think of it like you're sitting there like, I'm looking through Netflix. Let me try a show. Well, I don't know. I'm going to try this. But the second episode, when you hit play, you're interested.
Yeah, I would never watch it.
Ignore that and just say what you were going to say.
I was going to say, how much of this do you think our inability to let go of certain atonement theories or a need for, we need an atonement theory, we need a better, comes from maybe a diminished understanding of what it means to be human?
That's a good idea. Say more.
Well, I'm just thinking that when you understand what it means to be human in a really individualistic way, maybe I've been doing some research on this on my own, so that most people would say something like, well, what it means to be human is to have certain capacities, right? Mm-hmm. We have the capacity for reason or for speech, language, blah, 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 whatever.
Things that every human clearly has, Nathan.
Yeah, right. Every human, except the ones that don't.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean. But like that versus what it means to be human is in sort of like a relational sense. So what it means to be human is that we are related to other humans. I think that the way that you view that is the need for an atonement theory changes in some way. I don't know. It's not really fully formed yet, but I don't know if there's something there.
When Father Sam, who was my spiritual director, taught me that I had a year-long class like the history of Christian spirituality in divinity school, and Alicia was his research assistant, a Benedictine monk, and anyway, he's one of the people that I mean, he was like a Vatican II is for wussies Catholic. So, like, theologically, a very...
You have that, like, on a bumper sticker?
No. But I don't think he would have been upset, like, it with... But, so, I mean, I say all that just to say, like, anytime I say I learned something from him, I feel like those are ones I should really put in the bank, because... I was predisposed not to trust him. Now, he did have one of the funniest jokes I've ever heard, but it might have just been because he's a Benedictine monk, which made it funnier.
Yeah.
So we were at a cookout for divinity school, and this is like a liberal Protestant, primarily divinity school. He's a Benedictine monk who's just like Vatican II. That's edgy. And he, and he said, Tripp, do you believe that dogs go to heaven? And I was like, what do you mean? Now, Alicia and I, we're married, but no kids. and we were walking. Well, our puppy came to the div school cookout. It was like we're welcoming new first year students. So it's like they're in orientation, but we live there, so we're going to go and meet these new students. So Pebbles comes, little baby Pebbles, and he's like, "Do you believe all dogs go to heaven?" I was like, "I don't know. I'm sure y'all have a doctrine on that, but like personally, as a dyslexic man, I feel like God and dogs are really similar." Now, I know Pebbles is a female puppy, so I don't want to. I'm not saying anything about God's gender. That could make us have an argument, Father Sam. But I'm optimistic. He goes, well, dogs go to heaven. People always ask, do dogs go to heaven? And I say, yes, but cats do not. And I said, Father Sam, why, cats don't go to heaven? He said, yes, I can't stand cats. They're deplorable, reprobate of a species. Cats, one of the joys of heaven will be hearing cats wrapped in wet blankets put into microwaves. Oh yeah. Now I hate cats. Alicia's deathly allergic to cats, so neither one of us down for cats.
Yeah.
Now that's a horrible picture. And then I look at his face and think to myself, this guy thought this was a funny joke. And he didn't say it like I was hoping this creeped you out or anything.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's what 5 years in silence would give you. Though he was also a huge fan of John Stamos because of all of his Lifetime movies. He's been in large numbers of Lifetime, like the Lifetime movie channel, like the Hallmark of TV channels, like TV movies. John Stamos rocks them junks. And he loved John Stamos. So nonetheless, that makes me think of Andrew, who also had a question about this.
Hey, Tripp, my name's Andrew. I'm an MA student at Bethel Seminary in St. Paul. I just wanted to thank you for the show. I refer to it as the bad habit that I can't quit. As you and probably many listeners know, Bethel's taken a far more conservative turn in the last few years. And although I consider myself still a theological conservative, I've considered homebrewed Christianity just a great tool for self-critiquing previously held views on God's sovereignty, nature, theodicy, and like issues. And so as I've been listening to over the last few weeks, interviews that you've done of Moltmann, of Roger Olson, of Thomas J. Ord, and really talking through those issues, it draws me back to a conversation that I had with my 10-year-old daughter on the drive back home from a swim meet a few months back. And it was in the wake of one of our nation's innumerable mass shootings, and she said that one of the struggles she went through, just like I at 30 do, is that how it is that God can be good and evil can happen. And I shared with her what I call the Kung Fu Panda 2 model of theodicy, which, if you'll remember, in one of the last scenes of Kung Fu Panda 2, Po stands in the breach in the canal, and Shen, who's the crane, who is the embodiment of genocidal fanaticism and evil, he shoots Po with his cannon from the leading ship in his armada. And Po takes the blow, not from God, not from some father, but from the embodiment of evil. And he's blown out into the harbor. Shen takes his armada and encircles Po in the harbor. And all that stands between Shen and the destruction of all of civilization is Po. And so Shen and the armada then proceed to shoot cannon after cannon at Po. And Po, he takes these fiery embodiments of evil and redirects them. He basically grabs them and throws them back to destroy the armada. And so it seems to me that there's something poignant there, that there's something cruciform or Christocentric even in this one scene within Kung Fu Panda 2, which is that Po takes evil and uses it for evil's destruction. It's not given by God. It's not given by some transcendent, benevolent other, but it's that the blow comes from evil, and that blow is what is the undoing of evil and is the salvation of civilization. And so I'm interested in your view as to the, quote, Kung Fu Panda 2 model of atonement, and thanks so much for listening to this, and any comment you could give back would be most appreciated. Thanks.
Andrew, let me just tell you something. I do not believe that you go to Bethel Seminary, because Bethel Seminary is a theologically conservative, which you call yourself, theological institution, and they would never be watching Eastern Buddhist propaganda films like Kung Fu Panda. We not only is Kung Fu Panda a propaganda film for Buddhists,
also for Jack Black,
and for Jack Black, who we all know is a member of Tenacious D, and we know what the D stands for.
We absolutely do.
It's tenacious. Not only that, but Kung Fu Panda is a very popular cinematic reference for Slavoj Žižek, who is neither a theist nor a capitalist, which is essential for American Bethel attending theological seminary students. Now, that might have sounded a bit Yoda-like, but that's because it was an accident. Look, I'm really glad that homebrewed Christianity is your bad habit. There are so many words, bad habits.
Yeah.
One of them being blow. One of the bad habits is blow. And in it, you talk about the bad habit of blow coming from evil. We're not talking about blow like if you just finished Narcos second season on Netflix blow. But we're talking about blow like the blow comes from evil and then it gets returned to evil because Poe knows. Poe is also a character in episode 7 of Star Wars.
Mm-hmm.
Which is better than Kung Fu Panda 2. Now, I say all that just so that I don't lose my street cred with all your Bethel friends. So that I've already identified you as a secret undercover Buddhist missionary who's also has Marxist and Maoist tendencies because you resonate with Slavoj Žižek, who also loves to talk about Kung Fu Panda. Anyway. That's really funny of a talk that sets up you talking to your daughter about a shooting. Now,
wow.
I want you to know that I was also a dad during the shootings in the past year who talked to their kid. And I also had the questions where my kid asked, well, why would God... Now, my kid might be older than yours, so I remember back all the way, it was almost 2 years ago, where we had the big shooting with, where you had like 20-some die at the school. And then we've had multiple shootings since then, and the NRA has done the bidding of the 45% of its members who agree with what they've done. But I think the way the story Andrew tells is really important because a lot of our theological reflection exists in a world where our reference points are the religious tradition we come out of, the way questions are given to us by family or friends, the history that's going on before us that occasions those questions, and like even homebrewed being called a bad habit, which I hope every conservative Christian wear their bad habit. It could be such a bad habit that they go to homebrewedguides.com and pre-purchase all 10 volumes of the Homebrewed Guides series.
Think of it like a nicotine patch.
Yeah. Think of it that way. Yeah. I have a new atonement theory called HBC Guides books. Anyway, but I one of the things that struck me about the way he phrased it is I think people that may not be conservative, be more conservative, more progressive, or even not even Christian, could all understand I have a worldview that I was handed.
Mm-hmm.
There are these events that someone I'm supposedly handing on another worldview to, my kid, ask questions that I don't think I have good answers to. And guess what? It doesn't even matter your theology. That's how you will feel when someone that you were a participant to giving reality and life to asks you a question about something as horrible and ugly as to completely preventable deaths based on stupid gun laws that we know aren't going to change based on lobbying, investment, and weird Western ideology that's internalized to Americans. And that's just even the way I would talk about it. Because I could also imagine my father-in-law, who also doesn't want it to change, who would tell that very same rant in a completely different way. And me like, well, the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. And luckily he has them. Now, and not just him, plenty of other family. So, like, my only point is that when we talk about theology in the abstract, always remember it pops up in these situations. And the reason it's important to think about it in advance is because all of us are friends and family members of people who are going to ask really good questions at some point about actual life. And what do you do? Now, the other side I would say is that if your callback to your kid is Kung Fu Panda 2 and it's not shitty theology, then you really don't have to worry about your parenting.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, you're already in the top quarter. I can't speak 75. That's a solid D+. But you got a D+ or above if you don't flinch, go Kung Fu Panda 2, don't tell them their feelings or experience or questions aren't important, which is the most important thing to do. Your kids will always have other experience that occasion new questions and criticisms of you. So don't downplay them, or you just won't hear them later, and then all of a sudden you'll be like, Alicia will say, Tripp, why is Elgin a Calvinist libertarian? And it'd be because you silence his questions and thinking, which is one of my goals, is to avoid that.
Yes.
But I don't know, Andrew might be trying to avoid him being a process Green Party member because he's in Minneapolis and is a Bethel. No, but the only important thing is, like, if you've internalized your convictions to the point that you can go like Kung Fu Panda reference, describe it, and say that Po in Kung Fu Panda 2 took a blow not from God the Father, but from evil, and did so, and then redirects it at the bad. Like, that's a very creative. I could imagine using that example at other points to say, like, this is what's going on at the cross. Now, because it's Christmas, the example that made me think of comes from Douglas Otati, who is a Calvinist theologian, and Andrew, we might have a Calvinist we're friends with. I don't know if you're a Calvinist or not. Douglas Otati is one of my favorite Calvinists. I was just pausing there to say that. Well, before I say anything about Doug, what do you think? I mean, you don't have kids. All I thought when I heard the Andrew thing is that I hope when Nathan's a dad, he can. No,
that's a great. I mean,
he can Kung Fu Panda the questions his kid gives like
it's
that.
Very Tai Chi, like use your opponent's energy sort of
that's what I'm talking about.
Against them, sort of thing, which I like. But what I think what's interesting in his explanation is where is God in that situation? Like it brings up issues of providence and divine action and stuff like that. Like. It changes the way you understand how God is and how God operates in the world and who God is, to think that it's, I'm sure, a lot of people have come across the question, why does God allow something like that to happen? And so this explanation, I think,
great question. Allow. Now, it might make you think, like, maybe I should listen to the Frank Tupper episode.
Maybe, perhaps.
Or Tom Ward one.
Perhaps, yeah, definitely.
But I think it's important not. Here's the thing theologians do, and I try to avoid it. Now, I'm sure I don't that well, but knowing that I try might make you think of how often it could have happened. Like, I try when talking with people that I don't count as overly nerdedly informed so that you can make weird phrasings and assume they know what you're doing, which no one should. You don't, like, unless it's your job, don't feel like you ever have to be there. This is not a downgrading thing. Like, okay, so I'm friends with a guy who has a very famous sports show. Now, me, him, and my other neighbor where I used to live, he is a very famous comedian. The three of us make beer. We talk. When one dude talks about comedy, the other dude talks about sports talk radio, I fake it. They say junk about industry because they share, like, you make content and sell it at high level type stuff. One of the other guys on the street is in charge of the ad campaigns for all the Marvel movies. The other guy on the street that we have we call them garage ragers, where dads with small children bring their baby monitors to my garage and we drink the beer we brewed together. And by ragers, we don't mean like a real rager. We mostly mean like 2 beers while we have baby monitors until someone's making noise and you go home. But it made us feel cool. Nonetheless, our garagers, I mean, everyone else was in some different industry other than being a minister. That, like, you know, it was legit and whatever. But each industry has their sophisticated speak.
Their jargon.
Yeah, and like what you gain just by being in it. And it's only because you're in it for a while. Yeah. Because I've had members in that group join, not know what's going on, ask other people in the group, what do they mean by this? And then 2 years later, they're making through 3 times as much money. I don't know if they got significantly better at what they did. They just knew how to play the game.
Yeah.
And so I just say that, like, if you don't know what some theologian's saying, it's like, that's not that big a deal. Like, you do gain stuff by learning the words and reading it, but it doesn't make you smarter or more Christian or more better thinker or whatever. It just means you can cut out about 10, 15 minutes of your conversation because you can use words the other ones you know. So don't lose any sleep about it. Once I realized that I had learned enough just because I'm an extrovert that likes drinking with friends in multiple industries, I could fake it in theirs. It made me disregard my own. It wouldn't, like, hanging out with theologians would have never done it.
Yeah.
But it was then, like, being as the one odd duck at industry meetings and other things where I knew, like, I could fake it and belong. And then did. Like, I pitched shows at a couple different, anyway, like, where I realized, oh my God, this is all they really needed. Outside of that, it's just like the ability to kiss butt like a champ, which I have a wife that makes exceptionally good, very organic chapstick. It's like Burt Beats times 2.
Burt's Bees?
That's what I just said.
Yeah. Times 2.
Times 2. It's better.
B squared.
The thing in it that makes it burn when your lips are chapped, she doesn't put in it. So when I get chapped nose, this is disgusting. I have one version.
We're just, humans.
It's just me and you talking.
Yeah, that's right.
I put it in my nose all the way up when I get chapped all on the inside.
I think it's just the mint that you must leave out because I think they put peppermint and stuff in.
I don't know. I just know it's like Burt's Bees, but it doesn't burn like crazy when I put it up my nose when I have a chapped nose.
So what does this have to do with Kung Fu Panda? I think Kung Fu Panda probably.
I was just trying to
Burt's Bees chapstick. I think that's what it was.
Yeah, but I was just trying to affirm Andrew's.
Oh, absolutely.
Parenting skills.
Oh, I mean, to be able to take complex things like that and related to your kids using Kung Fu Panda is a very Kung Fu parent move.
But here's my transition. And I've been thinking about this.
I can't wait.
When he talks about the blow that comes from evil, and then you got to send the blow back at the evil, because when the blow goes back and forth.
I'm with you.
You're not supposed to laugh like this.
Sorry, I was thinking of something else.
You're the mature one. But here's the thing. When your kid gets into high school and you're going to talk about not returning blow for blow, you can't go with Kung Fu Panda. You can't talk to a high school kid about Kung Fu Panda.
No.
You have two options, and you have to tell me which one's better. One, you go to Return of the Jedi, motherfucker.
Whoa.
That's
Can you
right.
say that on this podcast?
Now, Return of the Jedi, what happens? Who's the one that sets the Force right? Until Episode 7 came out. And now Luke has to come back with a beard and do it.
Mm-hmm.
Or is Rey going to do it? And Rey's like the she who is sneaky reach around of the Star Wars. Now, what's a 9? Like, if you don't have a trilogy, you don't have a sextuplet. What do you have? A nineology?
I guess.
Sure. Anyway, now, trying to say, I hope that...
So, Return of the Jedi.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
Because what happens? Luke's like, nah, I'm not going to kill you. And then Anakin is like switching teams. He's a switch hitter.
Yeah.
It's
the suffering of the son.
It's either that or he's force flexible. Polyforces, or force fluid.
That's the one, force fluid.
Anyway, my son's 9. We've had a conversation about nonviolent Christos Victor atonement theory using Return of the Jedi. That the real power is the power to say no to the cycle of violence.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm talking about Jürgen Moltmann, Crucify God and Junk.
That's good. What's the other option?
This is the better one. Because this requires like an entire holiday break to fully work out with your child. This is watching the entire Hobbit through Lord of the Rings movies in order.
Oh, man, I like where you're going.
Because if you want to know where the blow comes from, the fires of Mordor. But where does the fires of Mordor come from? The hubris of the powerful in their desire for more power. And what's this undoing? But the innocent who find power, evil thrown upon them, being twisted so inward. Because this is a callback to your love of Augustine, which is in the Confessions. It's the nature of hubris is to being turned inward. Now, such to the point that the inward turning of Frodo and Gollum leaves them biting the finger off and it falling in. So you have both the non-destructive intuitions from Gandalf, who's like a lord of the god, like born, continuously reincarnated, all that kind of stuff. And in like Gollum, Frodo preserved. And they're preserved by what? They're both preserved by one, Gandalf's teaching, but also Sam's friendship. And it brings them both to the point. Then when Gollum goes snip, snip, snip on the finger and the ring falls in, neither one of them would have chose to throw it in. But the blow of the ring that rules them all gets its own destruction because that power is something no one can seize. And that is the biggest affirmation of the inherent goodness and gift of creation. That the destructive power that rules them all is something no one can seize. That in their desire to seize it, it's its own destruction. And I explained that to Elgin, and we had at least 4 or 5 minutes where he was just like, so that's what's happening at Easter? I was like, yeah. And he's like, well, no one bit anybody. And I was like, well, the world crucified Christ. And he's like, but Dad, don't you think if God wanted us to know more about it, there would have been dwarves in it? And I was like, that's a really good point. That's a really good point. Now, I do know that when Tolkien wrote all this, he was wanting to say the same thing. And then he paused for a second and he goes, so, when you say that you don't have to preach on the liturgical text? And I was like, ordinary time? And I was like, yeah, when you wear the greens. And I was like, yeah, it's ordinary time. He goes, what if you talked about The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings at church? And I said, Elgin, this is what if a trustee at church said this to me, Junk could get uncomfortable. It's a great idea.
Yeah.
Anyway. So Andrew, that's my reference. Is it like when they get older, you could go Star Wars. That's not bad. But if you go Lord of the Rings, here's the reason Lord of the Rings is superior. What do you have at the end of Return of the Jedi? You have evil father, son. Now, what do you have at the end of Lord of the Rings? You have two victims of evil who are owned by it and possessed by it. Gollum, Frodo. And what is his son doing? A friend, Samwise Gamgee. And thinking back to your reference of Jurgen Moltmann, this is a throwback that I did not anticipate. What was the office, the Christological office that is passed on to the call of the church that Moltmann says, on top of being priest, prophet and king, what do we got to throw on because of Jesus?
Friend.
Hell yeah, motherfucker. But Sam Wise Gamgee is the hero of Lord of the Rings and all them Tolkien books. And here's why. Friendship conquers. Check that. Boom shakalaka. That's why you got to get them on the Tolkiens. And then when they turn 16, buy them a sweet ass pipe.
That's right. Or a sword or something.
A sword, that's violent. You don't need one after.
No, it was just like the shard of...
okay.
Yeah.
A broken one. Yeah. A broken one. It takes an elf to put back together. You have a book out.
Really nerding out right now.
But I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I like now for some real fundamentalists who really need someone to die and all that kind of stuff. You might need Vader to throw the Emperor
right
off.
I mean, though Gollum did die. I mean, someone did have to die.
Frodo died. He didn't get to go back to his life.
Frodo went to the...
He went to Elfin Land because he couldn't stay with his friends.
Gollum died, though.
Gollum was freed. Ain't nobody getting freed.
I'm just saying that people had to die.
Gollum gets what Vader gets without being conscious of it. If you look, Lucas, name the Tolkien character that is in any way commiserate. With Jar Jar Binks. like, here's how bad Jar Jar Binks is. Is it in the entire Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies that you couldn't even invent a character that wasn't in anything he wrote as bad as Jar Jar Binks. And the characters that were in what he wrote that were not most dutifully used were still not as bad as Jar Jar Binks, and not one of them were made the linchpin that made a Senate move to make the plot move to connect midichlorians, which are essentially the reductionistic materialistic explanation of an interrelated non-reductionistic process world explained scientifically. And I'm just saying.
I think what this means is that we need to have maybe some future.
We need to have
Force
Ewan
type
McGregor
thing.
back on the podcast.
That's what we need to do. Yeah. He will answer all.
Yeah, but this time we won't just be struck by how good looking he is.
Man, his hair was amazing.
Anyway, any thought you're
I was
gonna say
watching a show the other day where he was a guest on there,
and you said
I leaned over to Miriam.
that
I'm like,
time
"Hey,
we hung
Miriam,
out?
that time I met Ewan McGregor."
What's amazing about that time is that after it, we went to Alpine Village,
Oh my God, we did.
which is like a German village,
It's so weird, but it's awesome.
and we had like German beers and a plate of meat and cheese.
Yes, like a
and
huge
sausage
sandwich
things.
of like meat. It was amazing.
But we had an appetizer of like sausage slices or something.
Yeah, different types of sausage.
I don't know what that says. That
First,
after hanging out with Ewan
Ewan
McGregor,
McGregor.
we were like,
I need
Hey.
some meat.
when we leave this very hip establishment on Hollywood Boulevard, we're going to drop back to Torrance. But when we get off the interstate, we're going to go to a place.
I mean, he's Scottish, so I don't know. There's some connection there, I'm sure.
In Europe, it's one village over.
Yeah, that's all it is.
And that's why you should come to the Homebrewed trip across Germany. Now, I'm sure at this point, our friend Jesse from Dallas has other thoughts. But right now, Jesse has something to say to us.
Hi, Pete. And hi, Tripp. I'm Jesse. I'm a software developer in Dallas. And I've been listening off and on for 2 or 3 weeks. And I want to compliment Tripp on his fine, unbroken jaw. I think you really deliver your points on heresy with fine alacrity. And it's remarkable that your jaw is intact. Sorry for the violent reference. Cheers.
Jesse Crockett from Dallas, Texas. I feel like your call is a good occasion for me to explain that there's been some significant confusion on the internet. Pete Rollins and I, while having lived together in the same home, our theologies did not necessarily rub off on each other significantly. Now, our friendship did. The levels of endearment I have for him have grown. Levels of understanding. But when you're talking about my jaw and its ability to do heresy, I mean, it obviously depends on who you're talking to as to what counts as heresy. But I really think that on behalf of the clarity of Pete's vision, that it's really bad for him to be too associated with my commitments. I've gotten text messages from Pete Rollins where he's like, why did I have to answer a question about process theology?
That would be hilarious to hear him do that.
Maybe that's what we should have a special podcast episode where Pete answers questions about process theology.
That's a great idea.
And then someone gets me mad and makes me spill wine all over my pants. But listen, Jesse, I don't know what kind of heresies were being spoke of when this was recorded, because it was months ago. And you can listen to any episode of this podcast back from 2008 if you know how to use the internet. And there's over 1,000 episodes, except we haven't done the 1,000th episode yet because
We just skipped that one.
we skipped it.
It's like hotels that don't have a 13th floor.
Yeah, we skipped it until the time in which the 1,000th episode arrives. And honestly, all of you that are chart-chasing Christians all know what's up with that. You never know when the red heifer is going to show up. But
The appointed time.
I don't know. I just regularly get concerned about. I just don't want to ruin Pete's street cred for him getting associated with me.
Yeah, that's dangerous.
I don't,
People would be thinking he's like a Christian or something crazy.
or I mean, like, They might think he believes in God.
What? That's, yeah, can't have that.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, like, they might think he prays at meals. Now, I do. Like, so much that my kids, like, catch you if you don't.
Yeah.
And we have songs that do it.
Yes, you do.
We do the Lord's Prayer with our mother every night. We do like intercessory prayers, which is what you do if you're a process person and progressive, because you actually think there's a real God that does real things in the world, and you and all creation are contributing to each moment of becoming. And so in not just praying, you're not just like, I'm directing myself. You're cooperating with God in the moment of each becoming, which, if you are not going to deny physicists, you're a part of. So why not contribute to it? I don't know why not, but Pete does. Anyway.
How's your jaw feel?
My jaw is still sore. Though, let me just, how about I put it this way? And I'd be interested in your answer. This is my favorite because you're friends with Pete question I was asked on the book tour last year. They said, I read your book about Jesus, and in my head I'm thinking, it came out 2 weeks ago. How'd that happen? And I thought, I think that you think God's real. But I'm not sure you really believe that.
Ooh.
Now, I'm interested in what you think my response might have been. I was being nice. Someone had just paid money for a ticket that they had read a book, theoretically, and the ticket included them already buying again the book that they had already read.
Yes, yeah.
Because
I imagine your response was something like, you've been listening to a little bit too much Pete, perhaps. Something like that?
Well, as having had pastoral experience, I said that their intuition about the divergence between myself and someone that would reject the reality of God who does things and could possibly reveal God's self in the person of Jesus is correct. But my affirmation of the reasons of their hesitation is robust. And I said, any believer we have today must be simultaneously a skeptic. Mm-hmm. And that all that stuff will be discussed in Barry Taylor and I's class.
Forthcoming course in February.
Yeah. Which, if you're a member of Homebrewed Christianity,
deacon and or bishop.
Yeah, but
elder and bishop, excuse me.
But all you have to do is go to homebrewedcommunity.com. You can join. There's going to be 4 weeks. We'll each give lectures, then we'll talk to each other. You can use the videos for your own class. Look at that. Those are seamless. I didn't even know this was coming in here.
It's like we planned this.
Yeah, but we didn't. If we had planned it, I wouldn't have planned spilling a very expensive glass of wine on my pants after I heard Jesse's.
This was your jaw. It was just...
My jaw.
Hurt so bad.
You want to talk about my jaw? All right. Well, I hate ruining Jesse Turry's name by this Jesse.
Is there another Jesse we could hear from, perhaps?
There is.
Hey, Tripp. This is Deacon Jesse Thorson out in New York. I wanted to drop a quick message on the SpeakPipe covering 2 things. First, I wanted to suggest that you try and get Rabbi Shai Held on the podcast. He's a Jewish theologian, really into Heschel, and I got the opportunity to hear him lecture twice in the last month. The first time, he spoke with Thomas J. Oord about the question of, is it possible to believe in a God of love in this world so full of suffering? That conversation was especially engaging and interesting for me because Shai also identifies as an open theist. And then I also heard him just last week give a lecture titled, Why I Still, parentheses, Sometimes Believe in God. And he pretty much just covered his reasons for sometimes believing in God and his reasons in the world around him, which compel him to sometimes not believe in God. Highly recommend trying to get a hold of him if possible. And then second, I wanted to let you know that I am excited that there are 250 copies of the Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Jesus out on their way to New York City here. I'm excited to, I think probably towards the end of this week, hand them out to other undergraduate students here at Columbia, with other friends and sisters and brothers of mine in my ministry group out here. So excited to get some conversation rolling and excited to hopefully get some more students out here in the neighborhood of Morningside Heights drinking, or rather reading, the brew. Yeah, I'm excited to see what happens, and I'll let you know if there are any good stories that come out of it. Peace and Merry Christmas.
Well, Jesse.
That's a Jesse I can get behind.
That Jesse Thorson just redeemed himself.
Redeem Jesse's everywhere.
Jesse's everywhere, just going, thank you, Jesse Thorson from New York, who works at Columbia University and purchased 250 copies of Homebrewed Christianity Guide to Jesus. That's what they're saying.
I heard that sounds very familiar.
Which I just want you to know that affirmation was not taken lightly. Now, would have been taken more so if you'd purchased 500 copies. No, you might, after my mother, you might be the biggest purchaser of copies. So Jesse, and the fact that Jesse Turry, the man that designed the cover, and most of the graphics, asked the question. I went back through the SpeakPipe and found out that you had called months earlier, about a question, and I decided, while catching up on the 40-some or so calls that I haven't answered, and given the way this podcast is going, how many minutes are we at?
123.
Oh, the last one. Wait, we might have one more. Who knows? Nonetheless, we should get yours, because I want to show preferential option
for the Jesse,
namely group purchaser. And Jesse, I want you to know, you got a bunch of people that got the book. If there's a group of them, they're going to all get together in a dorm room or whatnot. You want me to Skype in and talk to peeps? I'm down. And if you bought a bunch of them for your church group, reading group, pub group, bunch of students, well, I don't care. I'm glad to show up on the Skype, on the Zoom video chat, and talk to you. Here's the thing about the book. It takes about 3-4 sentences to get me going. And by the time our hour's done, you might get a question or two in. So you got to give me some more preparatory work if you want to have more input on what happens. But I gladly show up to people who bought my book and talk to them. And we'll show up by listening to Jesse's second call from months ago. Because, well, look, this wasn't just a point. It's also related to what we were just talking about. All right? I don't want to be completely judged, but here it is.
Hey, Tripp and friends. This is Jesse Thorson out from New York City. So I just want to say I'm really into what the open and relational theologies have to offer. But I just have one main question. What do I do about all the passages in the New Testament that, through the language of wrath, punishment, and hell, they all seem to speak about penal substitution? And it's a tough doctrine for me to get behind because its concept of justice feels so arbitrary. And, I'd be happy to drop it, but right now I just don't know how to get through Scripture without it kind of popping up all over the place. Can penal substitution be a category in an open and relational paradigm where love is at the center? And how can I get through Paul's letters without using it as a category? Thanks for your thoughts. I appreciate what you guys do. Bye-bye.
Jesse. I think you might have been reading our friend Curtis's mind. He has a very similar question, And so we're just going to play Curtis's now, because that might be the easiest way of the podcast being less than 2 hours long. And I try to include multiple voices, Nathan.
You're doing a good job.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hey, Tripp. My name is Curtis, and first let me just say that I have really enjoyed Homebrewed Christianity. So thank you so much for all you do. I recently, in the last few years, have kind of taken a trek out of a fundamentalist sort of understanding of the Christian faith, which I think is a similar experience you've had. So I have found just your content really great. It's great to engage and listen to other Christian thinkers that are in more of a progressive camp. So I kind of wanted to ask you a question, and it's kind of two questions that are dependent upon one another. Well, here it goes. Right now, I would probably identify myself as an open theist, which I'm sure is something that a great many of people that listen to you do as well. Greg Boyd and Clark Pinnock, these guys have been really influential to me. And so while the philosophical arguments for open theism have been compelling, another thing that was really compelling is the biblical text depicting God as facing a partially open future and being affected by his creatures. So this has all started to kind of shift as I've been looking at the Bible, and I've been asking myself about inspiration, and verbal plenary inspiration just seems to not be a sufficient way to describe how the Bible functions for me anymore. So I kind of wanted to ask you, what do you think about the Bible? Like, what is inspiration to you, and in what sense is the Bible authoritative for the church and the Christian today, if it is at all? And then secondly, can we derive these sort of theological understandings about the nature of the future and God's foreknowledge from the text, if indeed maybe what we're reading is more of the Israelites' theological assumptions about God as they kind of shape their narrative to speak to their present circumstance? Can I really read the Old Testament and say, oh, it looks like God faces a partially open future, when in reality this just could be Israel's depiction of the events, or the biblical writers? So I would love to hear your opinion on, one, what is biblical inspiration? Is the Bible in any way authoritative then for the Christian? And then two, if you're interested, which it seems you are, in like process theology or open theism, what leads you to do that? Is it the biblical text? Is it simply philosophical arguments? I think that gives you a good idea of kind of where I'm sitting and the things I'm thinking. So I would really love your input. You can reach me by emailing me at csnell, the letter C, and Snell, SNELL, at live.com. Thank you so much, Tripp.
Now, here's the thing, Nathan. Jesse and Curtis have some good questions.
They
like
do.
I'm bleeding.
You are a mess.
And I think I can answer them backwards.
I like it. I like where you're going.
You would. Now, I'm gonna talk in like 3-minute spurts, and then you say whatever you want.
Let's do it.
Because I have an idea. All right. So point number one: how does an open relational person even think about the Bible? Here's what an open relational person has to think about the Bible: is the Bible's a product of two different people. One, the people of Israel in the early church, which is both of those peoples are packed full of a whole bunch of diversities of different issues and powers and all that stuff at play, and a God who's trying to communicate and relate to a bunch of people who have ears to hear all sorts of different stuff depending on different places and purposes. So Abraham can't hear what Jesus heard. So fidelity of Abraham will look very different than the fidelity of Jesus. As Christians, we believe that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, meaning that the fidelity or faithfulness of Jesus in each moment to the call, lure, desire of God meant that his life revealed fully the heartbeat of God in the world at that moment. Abraham does not have the benefit of Abraham, Sarah, and company through that whole trajectory on. So it's inappropriate to expect the same from Abraham and Sarah as you get from Jesus and company. Now, I say that to say that biblical inspiration functions in a very similar way. That in that history, you have an ongoing contestation around the idea of God, God's relationship to history, what it means to be God's people, Israel, or the church, and that Scripture is a testimony to an ongoing living conversation. A conversation is not closed, but it is alive. And so you would never go to Scripture and assume it's both inspired by the living and life-giving God and that its meaning's closed. Because Scripture's inspiration is an inspiration that comes to people that are products of their history, context, situation, and a product of their relationship to God. And that part of the reason we call texts sacred or inspired is because we recognize in those texts not just Paul, a first century Jew who switches teams and is like, now I'm down for Team Jesus, or Isaiah or whatever. We recognize in those texts not just those people and their situations and their histories. We recognize those people as faithfully responding, calling, and testifying to the living and life-giving God in those histories. And so we recognize those texts as sacred and listen and deal with them. But that doesn't mean in treating them as sacred, we treat them as ahistorical documents. That would actually be a violent act to their testimonies. Just like if you were like, Tripp, hi, my name's Nathan, and I think that God is living, life-giving, and loving. And I'm like, that's nice. Be quiet. I'll agree with you. And you're like, well, there's a reason. Shut up. I don't care. I'm going to take your conclusion. But do you even believe that life-giving... Hush, 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 hush. So when it comes to the question of an open relational understanding of the Bible, inspiration, and authority, I tend to think that the theological commitments of an open relational theologian means this to affirm inspiration robustly means that you can't abrogate yourself from sophisticated interpretation and the responsibility to exegete ethically and well.
Here's my thought, and just in response to his question, which comes first? Which comes does the belief in the open relational sort of thing come first, and then you view the Bible this way, or is there? Because I think this is sort of what he's asking. Is there, like, if by reading the Bible, is it possible to come to this sort of conclusion? Like, which comes first? So, you know what I mean? Do you sort of have to have those assumptions before you read it to get that conclusion, or?
I would say both and, in the sense that if you're asking us just like a historical reflection, hey, at what period, at what group, at what time believes something like you believe right now? I can point to people at different places. And then if you ask me why, I'd be like, well, there are these philosophical, cultural, historical and things. They were more interested in this text versus this text, all that kind of stuff. Now, the other side I would say is that if you recognize the act of interpretation and reception as that neither one of them are closed, then you can't answer the question on purpose. But the reason a text doesn't speak with one voice and isn't received with one voice isn't hippy-dippy, liberal, postmodern ambiguity. It's like just straight up being human, right? Like, I don't know. If any of you have been in a significant relationship for a long period of time, you will know stories that have completely different meanings, like now, than when they happen. You'll have, like, you'll know that junk you said or did now means something different than it did before. You'll know that you could be in a relationship where you together saw an event different at first, similar now, or vice versa. And that the meaning of something was never entailed in its happening. That doesn't mean it's not related to it. It's just not entailed in it. when Jesus says, "Who do they say I am?" and Peter and company lists off a whole bunch of different answers. And when he says, "Who do you say I am?" and Peter says, "You're the Christ, Son of the living God," and Jesus is like, "My dad told you." The point, it's not that the others should have said, "You're the Christ, Son of the living God." It's that a gifted perspective or a grace-filled perspective is that he's the Son of the living God. It's not obligatory. And so knowing that, when we deal with scripture or an interpretation or the history of Israel or the early church or whatever, we should never think that that the text or the story, the history, is inspired in such a way it compels interpretation. Interpretation is always a place the Spirit's at work. I can't remember who it was. One of the early Baptist theologians said, the Holy Scriptures are not perpetually holy, but are perpetuated as Holy Scriptures when the Holy Spirit takes them up in each reading. Meaning they become holy as we read them with the Spirit at a given point. Yeah. But
I like that.
It's not like the holiness is there like a little item. Yeah. Or even Aquinas, when you ask Aquinas what it means to read the Bible literally, to read the Bible literally is to read as God intends it to be heard at that moment. And that's so different than literal, American evangelical. They're like, well, that means that the sun actually stood still for Jeremiah. And you're like, there's a lot of problems with that, sir. Or you're like, well, the way Jonah stayed in the well and came out, he smelled good because these wells had a gland that was used for perfume. And you're like,
ambergris, you know what that is?
No.
Never mind.
But I'm sure it was a revival sermon at some point. But anyway, I say all that just to there's a certain flip or switch that happens to reading scripture when scripture's not like a report card, but a token, artifact, or keepsake of an ongoing living relationship with God. And then it means something different to read it faithfully. We all get to decide how to tell stories that we are a part of, faithfully or not. I know Alicia and I have been present where we realized the other one just told a story that was way worse when it happened. We just told it better. And it might just be because we know the other has reconciled to each other about it. Or it might just be because I even forgot how bad it was or what stupid thing I did or whatever, because I'm like, that wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
Or it could be more deliberate. But there's a politics in telling stories. And when Scripture is given permission to be the storytelling area, we've decided these tellings are sacred. Just like any community that has stories, then we don't have to read them as burdens to capitulate to, but narratives to cherish. And you have permission to cherish something you don't want to recapitulate. But
so, what was your first thing? What was your second thing?
Oh, well, the second thing was just about all the wrath and junk. Jesse was like, "Oh, I'm real worried about the wrath and whatever." And here's the thing: if you're worried about God's vengeance and wrath, then you aren't a Christian completely. And you just need to get saved again. And I don't mean it in a jerk way. I just mean that the gospel is primarily that God knows you completely and loves you completely. And that fear for the wrath of God, short of intentional, conscious rejection, is not something worth sweating about. And not because God's holiness is diminished, but because God's love is being diminished when your conscious existence is given to fear in the face of the one who is revealed in Christ Jesus. John the Baptist expected people to and this is from Josephus, not Tripp hyperbolizing for narrative's sake, to fast for a couple weeks till your skin sagged so much that he believed you really felt like crap before he would baptize you in the Jordan, that you really repented. Jesus walked into a town and forgave people because their friend thought he was limp and broke somebody's house and dropped him down up in his business. Jesus forgave people who were in the business of prostituting themselves, of overtaxing Jewish people as a Jew on behalf of the oppressors. Jesus forgave people with just like an inkling. And half the time, he forgave them because he told them he was about to. He was like, guess what? The kingdom of God's here, and you're a part of it. That's when people say, now this is one of the places where I would reorganize the offense of Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard thought the offense was that the infinite became finite. That the incarnation was the offensive part. That God was human. I think that is offensive. But post-Christendom, it's not hard for anyone to think that God was human in an inherently offensive way. Mm-hmm. But guess what? You could be a part of that religion and not think that you were valued prior to your own assessment of yourself. The offensive thing is that the wrath of God is not set against you at all. And the wrath of God is the greatest mythology for misunderstanding the gospel. Not that God isn't just or holy or any of that, but that God's desire is not for that the distance between God's holiness and our holiness, or God's infinity and our finitude, or any of those things are not justifications for our destruction, but opportunities for the demonstration of God's desire and love and care for us. And so when we worry about the divine wrath, we miss what's at the very heart of the gospel. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Or before the foundation of the world, the Lamb was slain. Or that God sent God's Son for what? The entire world. Or that, and through Christ, sin, law, and death are conquered. For what? So that God may be all in all, meaning all comes to participate in God. And there's not a contrast. Like the fear of wrath means that you take your sin more seriously than God's decision to be the one who is love. And that's a failure to understand the gospel, not a failure to account for your sin. And I can hear myself younger hearing me say that and think I'm full of it. But at this point, I don't lose sleep when I read the Bible and pray at night thinking that. And I don't think it's unrelated to hearing all the Hebrew scriptures wrestle with these questions, or the New Testament. Mm-hmm. I just know that for me, there's the beauty of the gospel is how those type of questions are decentered, not resolved by a remaining sinner. If you and your partner decide that the time you spend together each week is appropriately answering the question, do you still love me? You'll never, that's not the situation for learning how to make love as old people with multiple orgasms. You know what I mean? It's kind of funny, but it's not. Because I've been the minister of very old people that describe a sex life that makes me creeped out. Visually. My imagination shouldn't be involved. Not that I'm against it. And in 50 years, I hope the same is true. But, if you ask them what their question was, it wouldn't have been the questions they had early on when they're insecure about their relationship. Right. You know what I mean? Oh, I was betrayed. You were betrayed. Or am I good enough? Blah, 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 blah. Those are not the questions that make the table for that meal. Yeah. And old people having multiple orgasms I mean, it's slightly humorous, but it could just as well be people that inflicted the most damage to each other holding hands while they watch their grandkids play. Or like going to yourself and saying like, I've never been more successful as a friend than when I wiped your butt and you don't know my name anymore. I mean, we can list off a whole bunch of examples, but none of those type of expressions of love. Or Frodo and Sam. When Sam understands why Frodo has to leave, and that Sam is loving Frodo by marrying, being mayor, and having all these kids. Like, that doesn't make sense outside of this whole relationship, but it is what being faithful to it looks like. And a lot of us don't reap the rewards of God's faithfulness to us in Christ. So we keep asking questions. How's God's wrath going to be dealt with? And God's like, oh my God. Oh wait, I am God. Why am I still dealing with this? I thought this was the point. Was to not have this question again.
Yeah.
You're like, well, I know you love me that much, and that's what I was asking. But what about this much? And what do you do if someone asks you that and you love them? You're like,
how many times do I need to tell you this?
Yeah. But there you go. And more of that will get covered in the webinar coming up with Tom Ward.
Yeah.
So
I don't know when this is going to be released, but that's going to be on January 11th.
So it could have just happened.
But you can, sign up for the replay.
You can do that. Or to be on the TNT stream.
Yep. Yes, it will.
So you're welcome. All right. Any closing thoughts?
Man, Kung Fu Panda, Lord of the Rings, Return of the Jedi, covered a lot of ground.
I know, but I'm just saying that I thought Andrew's parenting moods are great.
Yeah.
I thought that, like, Tabitha, not just her Canadian accent was cool, or quoting me, but that she brought up a topic and stuff that people continue to wrestle with. And the second Jesse,
Redeemer of all Jessies.
Yeah. First Jesse is lives in Dallas, Texas. And Curtis and Jesse, the good Jesse. I mean, not like Jesse Turry good, because he designs our logos. But the other Jesse, he and Curtis wanted to talk about open relational stuff in the Bible. And,
And I think you and Tom will be having another webinar soon. Be doing another webinar, open and relational.
Yeah.
Why go open and relational? So maybe I'm sure all of this will be brought up again.
I imagine so, but this was a pump primer.
The pump has been primed.
Or if we're thinking in agricultural metaphors, a ring expander.
Yeah, my trunk has been expanded.
Good night.